All right, well, the ANC's NEC Lekgotla is currently underway in Irene, Pretoria, and it appears that the future of President Jacob Zuma lies in the hands of the top 6 officials following the NEC meeting that discussed the issue of his recall last night arising from the floor. For more on this, we're very pleased to be joined via Skype by political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, a very good afternoon to you. Are we likely to see the president being recalled today after so many attempts in the past?
Good afternoon, Alicia. I think it's just been amazing that we've ended an elective conference on a very interesting note. We come into the new year and we see things moving so rapidly. So I think what's important to bear in mind here is the fact that there has been a decision taken within the NEC that there's definitely a need for the president to resign. And I think that's something that has been reported on decisively from yesterday evening to this morning. The question is the methodology around it. How is it going to happen? What are going to be the logistics and in terms of the framework, in the context of how this resignation is going to take place? And this seems to be where most of the discussion now has been focused on. Particularly, will the president leave before delivering the 2018 State of the Nation address? Do the different camps within there are going to be pulling out a fight and say this is not going to happen? So the question really is, what does this exit mean? And if this becomes a protracted discussion, a protracted struggle within the NEC, and of course with what the NWC, and we just saw the names of the NWC now looking very interesting as well in terms of where Cyril can actually draw some of his power, etc., I think becomes the real key feature of the next day and a bit, because Cyril needs to go with a mandate to Davos, not necessarily saying the president is going to resign. I think there's two parallel processes here. The one about the ESCOM issue and the fact that we just heard within the hour that the ESCOM CEO or head has resigned. And we now see names that are being floated around about possible replacements, which also indicates that this is not just about whether the president resigns and what message the deputy president takes to Davos. It's also about working systemically and systematically in getting through what has been some of the core areas of obstacle for Cyril. So he's working in the outer circle, moving towards the inner circle, and the inner circle is where the president is.
Look, Sanusha, with those two things that you've mentioned, they're very importantly the logistics and processes, but what do you think makes this time more probable for him to be removed? Is it solely the new leadership that has finally now got their ducks in a row, seemingly?
Well, I think there are a number of factors that play here. The one thing is that the president did not have a very, very good time last year with the number of court judgments against him. Yeah. So this is one angle that plays. The second thing is the fact that as he tries to counter, Cyril is also countering at the same time. And so what we've seen in terms of the NWC as well is, whilst we have seen people that make up the majority of a gender issue that had been almost something that was lost at the National Electoral Conference in the top 6, we see this coming out in the NWC. But bearing in mind, from when the conference ended last year in December to where we are now, a lot of things have moved. We've seen the asset forfeiture unit moving. We've seen questions around Mr. KGB being arrested. We see the whole question about the security and the security caps kind of being disabled. And if you look at that NWC, you've got to ask yourself, is there a level of representation by securocrats within that NWC, which have been the individuals that have been moving the power base, etc., for President Zuma? It does seem to me that there's very little or if nobody from that sector is being represented. The other names that come out is, interestingly, someone like Ronnie Lamola. He's been a key actor as well in Free State and, of course, for the Cyril camp in terms of their strategy and so forth. So these are key, interesting dimensions. So obviously, going after some of those stumbling blocks, those bullocks that have been there in terms of where the stumbling blocks were that protected the president, I think the deputy president has understood this is where we need to start shifting the sands. And once you start shifting those sands, the sand becomes quite subtly very fast up to become quicksand for you. So the question now is once you start making those kinds of inroads and moving the goalposts in that way, then of course the question is how much more does the president have to protract and to try and stall out? The question then is really around what does this mean when they say we want to do this in a dignified and in a manner that represents unity.
All right. Sanusha, we're still going to talk about the NWC later on, but I want us to first focus on this. The decision now by the ANC's NEC that it must suspend the executive committees of both the Free State and KZN. Why do you think the sudden need to dismantle these two factions? Are we seeing the first steps towards the ANC providing a clean house or conducting a clean house as promised in their January 8th statement? Is this what we're seeing at play here?
Elisha, this is very interesting because when we came to the elective conference in December, there was a lot of hype about these provinces, in particular Free State, and in particular about KZN because of its numbers, Free State because of the fact that it represented the Premier League. But what we've seen was completely an interesting turnaround by the Premier of Mpumalanga in how he actually positioned himself. We saw the Free State Premier come in, but under a cloud of controversy over contested votes. And of course, those two PECs were basically disbanded and disqualified from participating and voting. Now, obviously, this plays also to the way in which this opens up the space for Cyril to try and have some level of maneuverability and a strategic inroad into what he wants to see take forward. This places a cloud over Ace Makushulu because Ace Makushulu is an interesting character as the Secretary General. The question is that he has his PEC dissolved, but he's also there in the Tuli House by a very small margin, which means that he could actually not have the maneuverability that perhaps we think he has. And so he's outside of his province. How much of power does he have? And I think that's something we got to look at. The fact that the NEC, or rather the top six, has no one from KZN, but you look at the NWC and you see Senzo Mchunu there. Again, this could be different ways in which deals were struck on the outset and say we're going to go forward. But I think what is important here is that the NEC wants to show a clear messaging of who and how they're going to tackle a kind of revitalized, a renewal of the party in light of the fact that we're not going to wait until after the 16th, after the 8th of February, and we're not going to protract on this. We're going to go head on and we're going to start cleaning house because this is what the voters want to see. And I can't think of a better start for the ANC than in 2018 vis-a-vis the DA, which has had a horrible start to its new year.
Sanusha, still on those PCs now to be instituted in KZN and, of course, the Free State. How do you think, of course, this process needs to be conducted to ensure that the members are not back in court contesting the results, further creating further divisions within the party?
Well, it actually needs to be done in a manner that's much more applicable, much more discernible, and so forth. But what's important here, Alicia, is that I don't think this NEC wants to go back to court. I think the year of the court in 2017 is something that has really undermined the credibility, the confidence, and the legitimacy of the ANC in its various actions. So what you're really having now is a way to deal with this. And I think the one way that they may want to do this is to call a new election for those PECs and to see how those factions within the province can actually work together. I think the biggest shock has been from the KZN side when they realized that there's no representation on the NEC. And so to that extent, what they would be very careful of is understanding how factionalism in their province also weakened them at the National Elective Conference. So in a sense, I think what you're going to see is saying to them, let's follow what the court decided, that there's a level of decision where they said that these were not legitimate PECs. Go back, reconstitute yourself, have an election depending on what the process and the protocols call for in terms of the constitution and the whole framework of having another election. And do it properly this time.
All right, and Sanusha, I said we're going to refer back to this point now. Let's broaden this debate a bit and talk about the seemingly diminishing role and effect of women within the party. And of course, taking us back to the elective conference where the Women's League was solely blamed for not having had a suitable plan of how they would rally behind a single candidate. And of course, that would further promote the rights of women within the party. Talk to us about this, I mean, in relation to the latest NWC list that you think consists of more women.
I think that's very important for us to understand, because I think to a large extent the role of women was a critical feature for the NEC, I mean for the NDZ camp. I mean, everywhere you looked at, the messaging was, we need a woman president. And it was so unfortunate that we didn't actually see that emerge. And it raises questions about how do you use this as a election messaging, a vision of the party, where you say you want to have a woman president, it's time for a woman president, but you also see that this doesn't really translate into tangibles on the ground. And it tells you that power is much more than just about gender. It tells you that the politics of it was very sensitive and so forth. I mean, if you look at the NEC list and who won the biggest number of votes with regard to the NEC last year, it was Lindiwe Susulu, and Lindiwe Zulu rather, sorry. And of course, you're not seeing some of these individuals on these on the list as well. So I think the question remains is, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of what does it mean when we talk about a gender issue and we talk about a woman's president, and we talk about how this translates into transformation and questions around the gender issue within the party.
All right. And finally, Sanusha, I have to get your view on the alliance partners. The SACP is still firmly supporting the view that the president must go, and the party wanting to cement and rebuild, of course, or repair its relationship with its alliance partners. What if then Zuma doesn't go at the end of this weekend? Do you see a probable threat of the alliance disbanding?
I think the alliance is on its last thread. I can't disagree with the fact that the alliance has anything to consolidate itself. The level of influence and power that they may have within the party is something that I think that is just about rhetoric and so forth. But having bear that in mind, I think that the ANC is also very cognizant of the fact that they understand that they need the alliance partners because of the vote and what it means for the vote. And if you're looking at the NEC makeup and composition, you can see that there's almost no representation from the SACP. And that plays a critical role. So if President Zuma is not recalled this weekend, if they're still discussing the logistics and the framework of his recall, if there's still a protractedness around whether you recall him or it goes to Parliament and then he has to be forced to resign, and then all of the implications that come with that, I think the alliance partners will wave in the face of the ANC that they need them at the polls. So I think it's a bit of caught between a rock and a hard place for everybody right now. And the question is, we do know that if you want a good State of the Nation address on the February 8th, and you want somebody who delivers it with confidence, obviously everyone is saying this cannot be President Zuma. But unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see.
Sanusha, thank you so much for giving us your thoughts on that topic. That is Sanusha Naidu, a political analyst, giving us her views on the current developments within the ruling party. She was joining us via Skype.